What is going on, guys? This is BunnyMuffins. I have the TFT meta snapshot for patch 12.8, and the reason behind this is because in the next patch, 12.9 and 12.10, we are going to be having a lot of fun stuff being added, as they always do at the end of a set. But without further ado, let's just get right into the summary. In the S tier, we're starting off with Innovators and Renata Bruisers. Innovator's still pretty solid, even with the Frozen Heart Echo nerfs. It's still, I wouldn't say it is by far the best comp. I'd say it's just pretty good. Between the S and the A tiers, it's actually really close this time. You could switch around maybe these 5 compositions between the A and S tier, and a lot of people would probably agree with that type of tier list because they're just really close together in terms of power right now. I think Innovators and Renata Bruiser still eke it out. Renata did get a small buff, so that helps a bit. I'm also going to show you guys some of the more late game builds for some of these comps. Like in Renata, like I put the early game build out, but a lot of people are saying like, oh, I don't know how to close out with Renata Bruiser, so I added a late game version. Hopefully I can add that for more comps in the future. Next up, we have Arcanists, and Arcanists, they're just pretty solid because you can kind of be flexible with the carry as per usual. Scrap Irelia is still really strong. Socialite plus carry, hard to play, but very rewarding if mastered. Mutants, it depends on the mutant. The most popular one is the Voracious Appetite right now, but a lot of different mutant builds are working. I've actually heard that like pretty much every mutant is viable. You just need to switch up your strategy a little bit. And the reason why I say that is because normally one of the mutants is just like left in the dust and all the other ones are really good, or vice versa. But next up we have Ashe Reroll. I think with the Syndicate buff, Ashe Reroll, we can bump it up to the A tier. It was performing really well in the B tier last week. You obviously cannot go for Reroll Ashe every game, but I feel like it might be in a forcible state right now. We'll have to see as the patch develops. B tier we have Snipers. This is Jhin plus anything. Hextech Sivir, pretty weak right now. Maybe I should bump this down lower into the B tier. Twinshot's solid if you get the specific augments for it, such as Triforce or Double Trouble. Chemtech Challengers, if you get a lot of Warwicks, it's pretty good, but Ashe Reroll is the better 2-cost reroll. Debonair Draven, kind of weak. Syndicate Ahri, you should be playing Ahri and Arcanist instead of Syndicate. Talon Assassins, they've been getting nerfed a lot in the past couple of patches, but I feel like they're still solid. You just need to play them in the right situations. Next up, we have Striker. Striker's stock has dropped a bunch. I'd say like most Sivir builds, they're not performing too well right now, which is surprising to me, but it's just something that I need to tell you guys because most of the other stuff we have in the S and A tiers, I'd much prefer to play those than everything else right now. C tier, Twitch Reroll, Corki Reroll, Brand Reroll. I'm not saying they're unplayable, as per usual, but anytime I put something in the C tier, it's just like you are rarely going to play it because you need very, very specific starts to kind of set them up. So now going into how to play every comp, in the S tier, we're starting off with Innovators. There are a lot of different carries you can use. The picture I have up here, which is the most popular version right now, is with Jhin. Jhin and Seraphine are going to be your item holders. You could do like a tanky Jace in the front line or a damage Jace in the back line as your like super late game. Echo with Frozen Heart, still a great tech. He is going to just disrupt the enemy team a bunch. One tip though is just make sure that you are scouting with Echo because you always want him to jump to where the enemy carries are. Speaking of tips, we were just featured on the TFT Twitter, so if you guys are not following them and me on Twitter quite yet, head on over to twitter.com/BunnyMuffinsLOL. It's just like a kind of neat thing that they just decide to add on for some of the content creators in the game right now. But I thought it was pretty cool. Thanks so much for your support, because obviously I would not be in that position if it was not for you guys. But yeah, this comp, very solid overall. Not really too many weaknesses. Once you get the Frozen Heart Echo, it just makes life a lot easier. Your mid game, like stage 4, is mainly the Seraphine with Morello, and then stage 5, hopefully you get a Jhin 2 by that point, or even like a Jace. And yeah, after that in the super late game, Jace 2 start is going to be your like main carry. Vi is a solid tank. Obviously, you have the bear from the Innovator up front too, but that is going to be like the core of that comp. Next up, we have Renata Bruiser. So in the first part, I list out like the early game version. This is with 6 Bruiser. And then in the second part, I list out the more late game oriented version. We have like 4 legendaries here. We have Tahm Kench, Silco, Jace, and Victor. Victor is a very good secondary carry. Well, he turns into the primary carry, and then Renata's more of the supporting cast, but the transition between these two comps is really simple. You just take out the 6 Bruiser, add in the legendaries when you get them, and you are fine and dandy after that. Because the Bruisers, they do fall off in the late game because health isn't the best stat in terms of defensive capabilities. But this comp, I'd say it's like easy to medium difficulty. So do keep that in mind. It is like playable by pretty much anyone in my opinion, so this is definitely very strong. The only thing you need is like blue buff and Morello for Renata, and then after that you are good to go. Next up we have the A tier. So A tier is going to be slightly weaker, but still really strong, especially in this current patch. Like some patches, I say there's a big gap between the S and A tiers. This patch, I'd say they're really close together. So starting off with Arcanist, we have like the same picture that we've had from before. You can do Victor carry, Malzahar carry with reroll, or Ahri carry. Ahri is like the most popular one. You just use the same items that you have on Malzahar, or you could swap the Morello for like a Jeweled Gauntlet or something like that. You could go 4 Arcanists, 6 Arcanists, even 8 Arcanists. It really just depends on what augments you're getting. In the late game, you could add in stuff like Scholar, you could add in stuff like Enchanters. Your main tank's going to be Vex. Sometimes I like complementing it with Morgana, especially if I'm running an Ahri carry, so I get Syndicate. So it really depends on what type of units you're going for and what type of carries you're using, and also what type of items you're getting. If you get Spear of Shojin, Malzahar and Victor are slightly better. If you get a blue buff, you'd much prefer Ahri over Victor. So those are just some examples of what carries to go for based on what your items are. You guys can check out like the how to play sections on my website at bunnymuffins.lol for like a bit more detail than before, but we've gone over a lot of these comps already because the set has been out for quite a while now, so I'll kind of just give the high level summary in this video. Next up we have Scrap Irelia. This comp did get nerfed a bit. They nerfed Scrapped a tiny bit, which is why this comp I believe used to be like high A, low S tier, but now they're just like comfortably in the A tier. Still pretty solid. Irelia is still good. The Scrap value that you get is still good. Echo with Frozen Heart is still good, which is probably where the main strength of this comp is. Any comp that can run Echo is just going to be very golden. So I do recommend playing this if you like playing attack damage based comps. One caveat though is a lot of the attack damage based comps right now, like Hextech Sivir, Striker Sivir, Striker Irelia, they're both pretty weak right now, so I would focus more on the scrap version. And that just means like if you're building like IE Last Whisper, there are a few less comps that you can go compared to before. So it is slightly riskier to go for this type of build, but if you do get it, it's still very, very strong. Next up, we have Socialite Carry. So Socialite is very difficult to play because you are flexing pretty much everything, both items and your carries. I have a couple examples here. You can use many other different carries, but it all depends on where your Socialite Hex is. If you have one in the front, you might want a melee carry. If you have one in the back, range carries tend to do better. Kha'Zix is great because he works on any square, so he is a pretty good unit right now. And then of course, any random legendaries can be fit into the late game in this type of build. Again, difficulty is high, so if you're not that familiar with the Socialites, I would recommend playing other comps that are listed at like medium or easy. But the core of the comp is just going 3 Socialite and then just putting someone on the square, because the reason why Socialite is so powerful is that you could give more power to a unit past 3 items. So if a unit has 3 items, you can't put like a 4th item on them, right? So instead, to power them up even more, you'd add them on the Socialite Hex. This works really good in solo carry type of comps, not so good in like duo carries. Next up, we have Mutants plus a random carry. Mutants are like, they're really weird right now because it really depends on the version. I do like a small write-up down here to give some recommendations, but right now the one to look out for is Voracious Appetite. You just want to put a lot of ZZ Rot portals on some random unit in the front. Some people like using Kassadin because he dies earlier, so you get the spawns out earlier, so the spawns die earlier, and then you get more ability power and attack damage to your entire team. And if you, if you do go for the Voracious Appetite version, Kassadin's going to be your 5th mutant. You only need to run 5 here, but I show 6 because it depends on what version you're playing. But he will just turbo power your entire team on your way to like victory, I guess, because you just get so much stats from the extra spawns dying off. Because the way the Voracious Appetite works is that every time someone on your team dies, you get AP and AD, which is obviously very well and welcome. The other version's still pretty solid. Again, check the website if you want more info on that, but pretty much every mutant version is playable. You just have to do different things with that type of mutant. Next up, we have Syndicate Ahri reroll. So this is the only reroll comp in the A tier, I believe. And I'd say this is like a decent spot for this comp right now. What we're running here is 5 Syndicate, 2 Bodyguard, because Bodyguard has both Braum and Darius in the Syndicate build. And then I like adding in Clockwork because Orianna is an enchanter that works with Morgana. Jhin is a sniper that works with Ashe. So it's kind of a no-brainer to mix all these units in. Last up, we have Silco as the only legendary unit that pairs well with Zyra, and Silco is optional, so don't sweat too much if you don't have him, because whenever you do a reroll build, you typically don't have that much gold to level up to level 8, which is what is required to play 8 units. And the way to play this comp, and a lot of people ask me what is reroll, I do have some videos on that. I'll try to leave a card on the top right here. If I don't do it, just remind me to in the comments, but essentially you go to level 6, reroll for Ashe 3. What that means is you want to roll down your gold to 50 gold every single turn until you find Ashe 3 at level 6. So if you are level 6 and you have 70 gold, roll down to 50. If you have 58 gold, roll down to 50. And keep doing that every single turn at the end of every round until you get the units that you want. And then after that, level up to level 7, reroll for Morgana 3, and then you are going to have your team completed by that point. Ashe's items are pretty flexible. I give a bunch of different options, but I think the ones listed out here, I'd say they are the best, but the other ones work pretty well too. It's not too important. I wouldn't stress too much on that. The only required one I'd say is Last Whisper if people are running bodyguards or a lot of armor, so just watch out for that. Next up, we have the B tier. B tiers are still pretty good. They are a step weaker than the A tier this time around. I'd say there's a closer relationship between the S and A tiers and then a drop off into the B tiers, like a pretty sizable one. Sniper Jhin, he's just not as good since he got nerfed a little bit. His buffs before were really too strong, so he was overtuned before, but now he's more in a proper spot. I'd say he's actually decent. The only con to the Jhin builds is that he is quite hard to play because he fits in so many different comps. So the two pictures you see here, they use a lot of different units, and he fits in even more variations than the two versions I have listed here. So you pretty much just have to play good TFT whenever you play Jhin, and that is hard to just put in a picture. So do watch out if you are playing Jhin, similar to Draven, which we'll get into later. But my advice for playing those two characters is just always have one source of damage, which is Jhin, and then always have some source of tankiness. So one version here we use 4 Bruisers, so you might want to itemize Vi or the Tahm Kench. Up here we have bodyguards, so you might want to itemize like the Braum, Leona, or Morgana up front. You always just have to see what units you're hitting 2-star and prioritize items on those units. Next up we have Hextech Sivir. Really weak right now. Man, Sivir is in a rough spot. I don't really recommend playing this, but if you must, it's pretty much just 6 Hextech and then adding in like a Vi for more tankiness because she gives a bruiser buff. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Just this comp is a little sketch right now. Twinshot, this one you really only go if you get good augments. Good augments are like Triforce, Sharpshooter for your twin shots, and maybe some like econ ones like Calculated Loss could be pretty good because you're rerolling for 2 or 3 cost units, typically 3 costs, and you do like some sort of Lucian, Gangplank carry. You could also flex this with Senna carry, so you could see what you get. And then if you get like a Senna 3-star, you could go some sort of Enchanter reroll build. If you get a lot of Lucians, obviously you do the Twinshot build that you see on the screen right here. One mistake I see is that people like going for both Gangplank and Lucian. You can do that if you get them for free. But if you already have one of these guys 3-starred, you don't have to get the other one 3-starred if you have items on the one that you got. So if you have Lucian items and you got Lucian 3-star, you don't have to pay too much attention to Gangplank. I'd much rather get tank items on my Morgana than get damage items for my Gangplank if I already have a Lucian 3-star. So that is like my one tip, I guess, for this type of comp is that it's really expensive because getting 3-star 3 costs, it's not going to happen in many of your games. I'll just say that right now. So you really want to focus down and go all in, so to speak, on one of these champs and try to use that to kind of power spike your team. Next up, we have Warwick Reroll. Warwick Reroll, it's not in the best spot, but it's not in the worst either. You just need a lot of Warwicks whenever you go for this. I just wouldn't touch the comp otherwise. But main items you want are Titan's Resolve, Static Shiv is good. QSS is the only mandatory item, I would say, and then Rage Blade's also another good option. So you have like 4 options there, with QSS being mandatory, and then just flex the other 2 spots between the other 3 items. As for Tryndamere carry, a lot of people like running like Tryndamere secondary carry or primary carry. I would really only use him as a secondary carry, And the reason behind that is that Warwick's just that much stronger than Tryndamere, and Tryndamere is a little more expensive because he is a 3-cost unit, so it's going to be much harder to hit him, especially after you waste all your gold going for Warwick. Next up, we have Debonair Draven, very similar to the Jhin builds. Lots of different variations of Draven. He is difficult to play, and he's weaker than Jhin, so man, I really don't recommend playing Draven, but if you do like to play him, there are a couple different versions you can try. I have the 5 Debonair one up here. It's not the strongest, but it is the easier version to play. The other ones are to go what's called a horizontal Draven build, where you go for a lot of different little synergies instead of going for one big one. In this one, we're playing a vertical synergy, which is 5 Debonair, but you could go for a comp that's like 1 of everything or 2 of every trait and get like the lower ones, such as like 2 Bodyguard, like 2 Scholar, 2 Scrap, or something like that, and then whatever you add in after that. That's typically the better way to play for Draven, but it is very difficult, so again, I don't recommend playing him unless you are very familiar with him. After that, we have Syndicate Ahri. This one is kind of a more sustainy version of the Arcanist Ahri. But hey, if you get a 2-star Braum and 2-star Morgana early on, there's no reason not to go for the Syndicate version because it still does pack a punch. Main tank's going to be Morgana, main damage healer is going to be Ahri. You could do main tank Braum as well, it doesn't have to be Morgana, but Morgana 3-star is a better tank than 2-star Braum. So if you do have chances to go for a 3-star Morgana, I would prefer putting the items on her. If you know you can't get that, then I would put the items on Braum. Next up, we have the Talon Reroll. This is another 2-cost reroll build. Talon's been getting nerfed quite a bunch recently. It's still playable, but it's just not as good as before. I'd say it's like around like an average comp. Maybe I should bump this up higher in the B tier. Normally the order within the tiers don't matter that much. It's like very small, but I probably should bump this up later on. But the great thing about this comp is that the difficulty is low, so it's very easy to play. Anyone can do it. You just reroll, and we explained what reroll was before for Talon 3-star at level 6. And then, yeah, you just have to watch out for positioning. Always keep Blitz on the opposite side of Talon, and then make sure Talon hits something good. So you always have to be scouting to see who you're facing next, and then placing him in those spots. Echo, another great Frozen Heart user. I should probably add that item onto here. Next up, we have Striker. Yeah, it's just not that great anymore. I'm not really too sure why. They're just better things to play. Sivir's just like a bit weaker right now, and whenever you're doing the Irelia builds, the scrap version's much better. So if you're playing Irelia, you might as well just do the scrap version than the one we see down here, which focuses more on Striker and Socialite. You could also just play her in the Socialite version too. There are a lot of different options that you have. Next up, we have the C tier. Gonna skip most of these because you really only want to go for the C tiers if you have like super duper amazing starts for them, such as brand reroll. If you're starting the game with like 7 brands at stage 2-1, then I would go for the comp. If not, I would kind of just ignore it because he's just not that strong right now. But just to summarize, guys, like again, in the A tier, the S's and A tiers, the top 4 comps or 5 comps that we have here, all very close together. So if you're like, oh, I want to go for an S tier comp, let me only go for Innovators and Renata. I do not recommend that playstyle for this patch right now. I would be like, oh, maybe I go for like 5 different comps or 4 different comps because all of these are very close in power. If you do get some sort of very good Ashe reroll game, of course, go for that too, because that's going to give you pretty much a guaranteed good placements if you start the game with a bunch of Ashes or with like the right Syndicate augments. Mutants, depends on the mutant, but if you get Voracious Appetites, make sure to be building those Easy Rot portals. The Echo Frozen Heart nerfs, they did hurt a little bit, obviously, but I still see people in very high elos still building that item combination, so I mean, if they're doing it, for some of them, it's literally their job to be good at the game. Like, it has to still be good, right? Maybe they just don't know what else to do, and they're still trying to figure out the patch, but like, they're still doing it. So if they're still doing it, I would still recommend doing it as well. But yeah, that is going to be it for me today. I am excited for patch 12.9. I think PBE comes out during patch 12.10, so I'll probably play a lot of PBE once that comes out for like maybe the first week or something, and then we'll have set 7 sooner than you think. That set 7 comes in patch 12.11, which is in like I think 40 days or a little less than 40 days, so that is going to be exciting in the future. But that is going to be it. hopefully you guys enjoyed this. If you did enjoy this, go ahead and hit the like button down below. Subscribe if you are new. And if you want more details, of course, go on my website, bunnymuffins.lol/meta, and I will see you all later. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to share and subscribe, and of course smash that like button. Each like is an LP I gain before the next video.